I'd like to start by drawing attention to my entry on the Register of Interest, including attendance at the annual rally in Paris on Iran freedom. I'd like to speak about in support of the statutory instrument to carry over the Iran sanctions regime. I would urge the House to support that statutory instrument today to enable those sanctions to remain in place. Sadly, abuse of human rights in Iran has been prevalent for many years. I was deeply saddened to learn that one of my constituents lost his wife in the mass killings which took place in Iran in 1988. Iran still has one of the worst human rights record in the world. As we've heard, it executes more people than almost any other country. It is estimated that as many as 273 people were executed in 2018. Despite vocal condemnation, Iran continues to execute children. Press freedom is heavily constrained and many journalists and bloggers have been jailed. The organisation Reporters Without Borders described the country as, quote, the Middle East's biggest prison for journalists. Gay men face the death penalty, and there was widespread revulsion in the international community when a gay teenager, Hassan Afshar, was executed in August 2016. Women routinely face punishment if they fail to observe Iran's compulsory dress code. Married women cannot travel abroad without their husband's permission. Their rights in relation to divorce are heavily limited, and they can be sentenced to death by stoning. Religious minorities such as Christians, Baha'is, Jews and Sunni Muslims are subject to discrimination and constraints on their ability to practice their faith. For example, many members of the Baha'i faith have been subject to unwarranted arrest and imprisonment. President Rouhani was hailed as a moderate when he was elected, but the human rights situation, I'm afraid, has deteriorated under his leadership. At least 30 people were killed and over 4,900 were arrested in protests between December 2017 and January 2018. These demonstrations illustrate the discontent many feel about the regime and the deep frustrations felt about the severe economic hardship that many in Iran are suffering. And I note the work of the National Council for Resistance in Iran in making the case for democracy, freedom and reform in that country. But it's not just at home that Iran's theocratic regime is doing great harm. Its malign involvement in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen and Gaza is a cause for the gravest concern. US Vice President Mike Pence described Iran as the single biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. They've engaged in a massive arms build-up in Syria and Lebanon, where they're stockpiling thousands of missiles. Hezbollah's arsenal of short and medium-range rockets supplied by Iran is now estimated to be 150,000. There are believed to be over 10,000 Iran-linked militia fighters in Syria. In Gaza, the terror group Hamas have boasted of the support they receive from Iran, and the regime continues to provide help to al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Iran is believed to be responsible for multiple cyber attacks on UK institutions, including what was described as a brute force attack on this Parliament. And lastly, I hope the House will note the decision by the US administration a few days ago to designate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organisation. A government spokesman in Washington explained that this step had been taken because the IRGC actively participates in, finances and promotes terrorism as a tool of statecraft. Yes.
Vice Marshal giving way. She rightly outlines the malevolent influence of Iran across the world, and of course including Europe. And does she agree with me? Iran needs to stop exporting terror to European capitals such as Vienna, Paris, Tirana, and many others. And if it wasn't for the UK security services and the Americans and those security services across the European Union and the Israelis, sadly a lot of other people would have died.
He's very well informed on these matters, and I'm afraid he makes an entirely valid point about the involvement of Iran in terror plots in this country and the rest of Europe. And we should never even think of loosening the sanctions regime unless we have real clarity and certainty that that will come to an end. Yes.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. She has, in a very powerful speech, explained all the nefarious activities of Iran throughout the Middle East. Could I also refer to allegations of meddling within Bahrain internal affairs by Iran as well?
It is a serious problem. Iran is the single biggest threat to stability in the whole region, and it's a concern to hear from my honourable friend that extends to Bahrain as well. Yes.
Without turning this into a geography lesson, will my right honourable friend also agree that the part that Iran allegedly plays in sanctions busting with the DPRK is also very concerning?
He makes an important point, and it further strengthens the case for supporting the continuation of the sanctions regime against this brutal regime. Returning to the IRGC, this organisation and its notorious Al-Quds paramilitary force are responsible for multiple human rights abuses, both within and outside Iran. And I very much hope that our government will consider following the example set by Washington and listing them as a terrorist organisation. So in conclusion, Mr Deputy Speaker, I believe there is the strongest of cases for retaining the sanctions regime against the government in Iran. There is arguably a case for making it tougher and reversing some of the changes made to relax the regime after the nuclear deal was agreed. The regime of the mullahs in Iran is responsible for horrific human rights abuses. It is a major sponsor of terrorism, and its involvement in conflicts around the Middle East and beyond, as we've heard, make it the biggest single cause of regional instability. It is an evil regime, and I very much hope that one day we will see reform and change in Iran, which means that the people there can live in freedom and democracy in a society based on equality and respect for their human rights. And I commend the resolution to the House.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to contribute to this debate.